My name is Jeremy Devins, and welcome back to the Quiet Mind Astrology podcast with the Friday forecast, looking ahead from Friday the 13th. What is that all about? I'll talk about that a little bit, some of the superstition around Friday the 13th, and the transits coming up, including tomorrow, drum roll, the big event is the new moon and the eclipse. So we'll talk about that, how to work with it. As I've been talking in the past few episodes, you can go back and listen to those. Last week I did a sign-by-sign horoscope, so you can know your rising and moon sign and see where the eclipse is affecting you on a more personal level. Go back and listen to that, and I apologize to all of the Libras because I said Leo when I read the Libra one. So there's not two Leo interpretations there. Sorry, Leos. But there is a second Leo, and that is actually meant to be Libra, which everything I said was for Libra. I just misspoke when I said it on the podcast. But if you get the weekly emails, the Friday forecast to your inbox, you'll see that I did not make that mistake there. So check out the Friday forecast weekly emails at quietmindastrology.com. You get these free every week. I do a detailed write-up on every transit, every major transit happening that week, how to best work with it on a personal level. And I like to focus on what you can do personally above all else, because we cannot control what's happening outside of ourselves. And there's so many things happening in the world that we just would not even have known about 100 years ago. And it's overwhelming. And if you feel overwhelmed this week with all the news coming out of the Middle East, then that is basically a normal response of the nervous system, because we are also in the Ukraine conflict and the recession and the economy issues and everything else going on post-COVID in the world. There's a lot, and there's only so much that we can directly influence. And in this podcast, I try to do my best to focus on the things that you can do best to work with your energies and live in alignment with what is your strengths, what are your gifts, and share those with the world, and maybe make some sort of positive impact as best you can. But I do think that the best thing any of us can do in these kind of challenging times is hold a frequency of love, compassion, kindness, curiosity, listening. I don't have any answers about what's going on in the Middle East. I don't know. That is way outside of my wheelhouse. But I can talk to some of the astrological patterns that I've seen through past similar events, which I'll talk about a little bit today, and what that might tell us about what's going on and what energies are at play here. But ultimately, I like to focus on what you can control and what you can directly influence. So that's what we'll talk about today, the transits going on, how you can work with it, and that is going to impact other people. If we show up from a place of empowerment, choice, creativity, curiosity, compassion, love, and show up to others who may be feeling anger, resentment, fear, hostility, blame, that has the potential for creating healing in that one relationship, and then maybe another relationship, and maybe others, potentially, right? But showing up from not love, but from blame, judgment, complaining, anger, resentment, is likely going to create more resentment, as you've probably experienced. If you interact with somebody from a place of hostility, anger, frustration, blame, they'll likely respond with the same energy. So like increases like, and opposites can bring balance and restore balance and harmony, as I talk about from the Ayurvedic tradition all the time. So what can we do to work with the energies going on in the world today? Let's talk about that. Let's look at the chart for what's happening today, the Prajna chart. So I'll open that here if you're watching the video on YouTube. And you see what's going on in the sky right now, right? Vedic astrology is what is actually happening in astronomy. Unlike Western astrology, which is what was happening 2,000 years ago. For whatever reason, they did not factor in the wobble of the earth, so they did not factor in the precession of the equinox. So when in Western astrology they're saying that the new moon is in Libra, that is where it would have been 2,000 years ago, but the precession of the equinox has changed our relationship of all the planets and stars in space. So this new moon is happening in Virgo, right at the edge of Virgo, though, right just about into Libra. So we'll talk about that happening tomorrow, what that means. But first of all, Friday the 13th is today as I'm recording this. Friday the 13th happens every year, at least once, at least 1 month every year. And it has a lot of superstition and fear around it, and the number 13 has a lot of this sort of negative connotation around it. But from best as I can understand, there's a few reasons why this might be, and one of them is in numerology that 12 is seen as a more complete number, like the 12 signs of the zodiac. The division of the cycle of the earth fits nicely into 12, giving us the 12 houses, the 12 signs, the 12 months of the calendar we use. And then 13 would create a disharmony in that. So that's one possible reason of this. But if you use numerology, you get 1 plus 3 to get to a single digit number. You get the number 4. And 4, as best I understand, numerology is not my expertise, but I understand it represents like wholeness, completion, solidity, stability, security, in the sense of like 4 corners of a square is a very solid object, creates a nice foundation for a house or a building. A lot of houses are built with square rooms because it's simple and solid and secure. So the numerology of 13 breaks down to 4. So it's kind of weird that that turns into this kind of fear. And then there's the religious beliefs, and 13 can be associated with the Last Supper, Jesus, and the 12 apostles being with Jesus, and then the 13th being Judas, who betrayed Jesus. Also not my wheelhouse, so maybe I'm misunderstanding that a little bit. Apologize if I am. Historical events, the Friday, October 13th, in 1307, King Philip IV of France ordered the arrest and execution of hundreds of Knights Templar, a powerful and wealthy medieval Christian military order. This may be part of the negative connotation as well. And Friday the 13th, this big mass execution. So that could be part of it, but that's just one date hundreds of years ago. Folklore and myths. Various myths and folklore perpetuated the fear of Friday the 13th. For instance, there are stories about witches' covens gathering on this day, and it's also considered a day of bad luck in some superstitions. Well, I'm all for the good witches gathering any day. So, and I think if we go back through history, what they called witches were basically people doing the stuff we do here, like exploring energy work and exploring what's happening in astrology and like these bigger, subtler energies in the universe. And they were called witches, and that was considered this terrible thing. But I think they were actually just very much attuned to energy. And of course, there's probably bad witches as well. Again, not my wheelhouse. But I do want to just address all of this because of all the superstition around Friday the 13th and say that none of this is in the Vedic tradition as far as I know. And it is more my wheelhouse. And I have not found anything myself. I'm open to being wrong on this, of course. But I've not found anything in the Vedic tradition that points to 13 or specifically Friday the 13th as being this negative, terrible thing. And there is a lot of, there's a lot of things you could call superstition in the Vedic tradition. And I don't focus on those things, but Friday the 13th is not one of them. And then in pop culture, of course, there's the Friday the 13th movies, which I grew up watching because I, as a kid, just wanted the scariest movies. Once I found scary movies as a kid, I wanted to watch all of them, which is so weird to me now because I would never watch any of them now. But I think there's something about facing fear and the sort of intensity and fear in my home environment that made those movies in some ways seem familiar, like familial. But at this point in my life, no thanks. But yeah, Friday the 13th is one of those movies, and that is so closely associated with, at least in my upbringing in pop culture, when I hear Friday the 13th, I would think of that movie with Jason and the hockey mask and all this. So that's part of it as well, but it's basically just kind of made up and playing on that superstition. And that's it. So maybe there's other things I don't know about. Always open to learning and exploring. I'm always a student of life. So if anyone listening knows about other Friday the 13th origins or there's some deeper meaning I don't know about, I'd love to hear. But as far as I know and the research I've done, it's just superstition. And it just kind of stuck. For some reason, it has this sort of stickiness in society. And I can see that, it makes sense. It's kind of fun to have these like things to be superstitious about or ominous or worried about or whatever in some ways, but Also, it should be rooted in reality and not just like delusion. Like, for example, we talk about the eclipses. There is this inauspicious energy around that day, and it's not just superstition. It's something I've observed through many years now, just watching what happens on the eclipses. There are often many inauspicious events that happen on that day, on the actual day of the eclipse. And if we go back to the source text of all this, the Rig Veda, 1750 BCE roughly, so over 3,000 years ago, in the Vedas, the source texts of all Vedic teachings, astrology, Jyotish, Ayurveda, the science of life extension, and yoga, the Vedas are the source of all that. And Veda means wisdom, and it's the collection of the wisdom at that time, which was received by the rishis, these people who would sit in deep meditation, and then they didn't write it down, they chanted it. And there's still people today in India who can chant the entire text of the Vedas. And the chanting of it is its own like amazing thing. You know, if you listen to rap music, you know, like Eminem will rap multiple syllables upon syllables in lines. It's somewhat like that in the Vedas, where it's like the sixth syllable rhymes with the third syllable of the last line. And it's this very complex rhyming pattern that makes it sort of hypnotic. If you can go on YouTube and just look up like Veda chanting and listen to it. It's a beautiful thing, but there's still people today who can chant the entire thing. So that tradition lives on, and that's how it was passed down orally. So it was believed that by passing it down through the word, it had a sort of resonance and groundedness to it and truth to it. Whereas if you wrote it down, it's easier to deceive and lie and be not true. And we can see that today. Like if you read somebody's written word, it's not conveying the energy, the emotion, the tone. There's so much that's lost in just writing words. So transmitting the energy is very important in the Vedic tradition, passing it down through mantras. And if you've never done mantra practice, highly recommend that. It's a great way to connect with this energy. I think a lot is picked up in the power of this Vedic tradition, of wisdom traditions, of understanding the universe through chanting mantras and connecting with that energy. Even if you're not Hindu or religious or whatever, which I would not call myself a Hindu, but I do value the tradition very much. But just chanting the Hindu Vedic mantras is a very powerful transformational energy, which I highly recommend you do if you haven't before. Kirtan or bhajan or something like this, or just looking up on YouTube or on Spotify, like Krishna Das or any of these great mantra singers. So all that preface to say, what's in the Rig Veda? What does it say about the eclipses in this source text? There's a big quote here. So quote begins, "When the moon lighted by the sun affects the sun with the darkness of its shadow, when it is in line with the sun and earth, then the person who does not know his area feels confused during the eclipse, and the regions too appear confusing. Similarly, O sun, light of the spirit, when the veil of darkness covers knowledge and awareness of the spirit, then the ignorant man feels confused, and the world too appears different. That is, the material appears as ultimate reality, and the spirit is eclipsed. He makes no distinction between body and soul." So a lot of talk here about how the eclipses create confusion. So on the day of the eclipse, you're not likely to have your best thinking. So it's ideal to lay low, chill out, maybe do something for self-care, not plan anything super important if possible. But if you already have stuff going on, do your best. Trust it will be okay. Don't worry about it. Worry does not help. But if you have the agency and sovereignty and space and opportunity and privilege to create your schedule however you'd like on Saturday, and then on the following, in 2 weeks, the next eclipse, then use that day to just chill out, lay low, don't do anything important, and don't do anything that requires like deep, important thinking or your best thinking, because there is this confusion in the air. And I've talked to many people, observed it myself, done many readings, and seen that on this exact day of the eclipse, often there are unfortunate circumstances or big mistakes or big problems that happen that could potentially have been avoided if moving that choice or that event or that interaction a couple of days earlier, a couple of days later. So that's what the Vedas say about the eclipse, that it's a day that can create confusion. Now, I want to add to this, somebody on a friend of mine who has some interesting takes on things on Facebook posted that the idea that you shouldn't look directly at the eclipse is sort of a modern idea, and that looking at the eclipse can be nourishing for your soul in some way. I don't know about that, and I don't have any source reference of that in the Vedas. I have not heard of this idea before, but I do know that there are people still in recent times who do what's called like sun eating the sun. And you can Google this as well. Look up yogi, no food, no water, sun eating, or something like this. And you'll see this person who's claimed to not have any food or water for decades. And all he does is he looks at the sun during the sunrise, and he claims that it causes this nectar to drip down the back of his throat that nourishes him, and that's all he needs. It's all the prana he needs for the day through eating the sun in this sort of metaphor. Look it up. He's been studied. They brought him into labs for a week at a time, and they see that he doesn't go to the bathroom, he doesn't eat, doesn't drink, and his eyes are very big. He looks like he doesn't maybe sleep very much either. But there are these people throughout history who do this, yogis who do this, and still in recent times. So there is something to be said about this sun eating practice, which I have no personal experience with. I really enjoy food. I don't know if I'm that enlightened to give up food yet. I've had times where I don't feel like I need any food because I've done so much breath work. That definitely has happened. Maybe you've experienced this too. If you do a lot of breath work, especially in the morning, first thing, food just seems almost like vulgar. It's like, I've got so much energy, so much vitality, so much life force. Why do I need this like dense matter to get energy? It's an interesting experience, which I don't always have. Again, I really like food. So that's my experience with being sort of a pranatarian at times, pranatarian fasting. That just wait. Let's give that like 5-10 years. That'll be on all the cool blogs and podcasts. The prana fasting. That will be the next big thing. All the research will start coming out. So that'll be coming up in the future. But you can do that now if you just do like some deep breath work stuff in the morning and experience that. But of course, the eclipses happen every 6 months like this, and when they happen, I do not recommend looking at the eclipse. And throughout what I've heard through the Vedic tradition, that is not recommended. But I do not have a good source reference. I need to find one. But I've always heard that, and open to being wrong about this. I'm always open to being wrong and learning more, but that's what I understand from everything I've researched. Don't look at the eclipse. It's considered inauspicious. And then just like eye doctors, optometrists will say, don't look at the eclipse. You got to wear special glasses. It can really damage your eyes. But if you want to look at the sun, if you're like, oh no, that's just some conspiracy from the man trying to hold us down. They don't want us to look at the sun and see into our souls. Well, then do that any other day. How about that? You have 361 days of the year you can look at the sun and show the man and the elite that you're not going to be brainwashed like a sheep. How about that? But just do it in the sunrise. That's the easiest time on the eyes physically, and that's the time that the yogi who they studied did it. He would look at the sun at sunrise, and I feel it's quite soothing at that time. And who doesn't like watching the sunrise? I mean, we're all like naturally drawn to that anyway. So the eclipses, again, every 6 months. Last one was April 20th, May 5th. Go back to what was happening around those times, and you're coming to a conclusion of that chapter of your story. And you can now move on to this next section of your story of your life over the next 6 months. As I've mentioned, for me personally, I am moving next week in a few days. So a few days now. Not on the eclipse, definitely not going to move on that day, going to lay low. But next week I'll be moving and then doing my silent retreat. And that seems to me like a good shift of energy and natural sort of progression of where I'm at and what I'm working through personally. And as I've talked about, let's talk about it one more time. What are some of the favorable and unfavorable energies of this new moon eclipse Saturday, October 14th? Now we'll go into all the transits coming up this week. It's a favorable time for new beginnings and creative endeavors. As always, the eclipses are this entry into a new phase of your life, but on the exact day, that is not the time to make the new beginning. But you are in it. You're moving through it. But on the exact day, just no big decisions. Potential for fresh insights and inventive thinking throughout this eclipse season around the new moon. If it was just a new moon, be much more favorable overall. But because it's an eclipse, just lay low on that day. It's a chance to make significant impact through creative expression. Chitra, the divine architect, hugely creative energy. I've been super inspired listening to this podcast about movies. All the Right Movies, so that's what it's called. And it's basically like the director of the movie is Chitra energy. It's like they've put all these pieces together, the story, the script, the lighting, the sound, the actors, the dialogue, everything. That's very Chitra energy. So I've been very inspired personally. I am a Chitra rising myself. So I personally am very inspired by that. I love putting things together, producing music, producing podcasts, producing the astrology mentorship, different courses, yoga classes, all this. The Chitra energy is very strong in me, and I am really inspired recently listening to these movie-making podcasts, which I go through phases of this, but right now I'm in a phase, and I'm really enjoying it. And there's a risk of impulsive decisions or lack of follow-through on the new moon and the eclipse. So no big decisions. If you feel impulsive, wait. Tendency to over-idealize situations leading to disappointment. Keep your expectations in check. Potential for conflicts related to creative differences. If there is some sort of collaborative decision to be made, maybe hold off on the Saturday. Then on Tuesday, October 17th, Venus moves into Purva Falguni Nakshatra for just 2 weeks. 2 weeks of Venus in Purva Falguni is a favorable time for romance and enjoyable social gatherings. If you're watching the video, you see Venus is in Leo in Purva Falguni here. And we see Ketu in Chitra as well. Rahu and Ashwini as well. We'll talk about the other eclipse in 2 weeks. So Venus in Purva Falguni also increased appreciation for beauty, art, and aesthetics. Potential for harmonious and loving relationships. There's a risk of overindulgence in sensual pleasures, tendency to seek attention and become overly self-centered, and potential for conflicts in personal relationships. Venus and Leo is this like princess kind of energy that can come out there. Sun in Libra on Tuesday, October 17th as well. Talked about this on the monthly horoscope. You can go back to that a couple weeks ago. But enhanced focus on balance, harmony, and fairness. A favorable time for building relationships and partnerships. There's increased diplomacy and a desire for cooperation. And we are moving on from all that Venus retrograde stuff into a more favorable energy for relationships. It gets much better in December, but it's improved already, and it's improving more as we go forward towards the end of the year. There's a risk of indecision and difficulty in asserting your identity. The energy of Libra, Sun is considered debilitated there. So Sun, our power, vitality, our sense of self. In Libra, which is known, usually one of the first keywords people think of Libra is indecisive. Like trying to balance multiple different energies and find which one is fair and right. So Sun being here can be a challenging time. And we're going to have this big stellium in Libra I talked about this month, where there's a lot of energy around relationships. What do you want? Who do you want to be with? How do you want it to look? What needs to be adjusted in the relationship? How can you compromise and navigate things a little bit better? And there can be some losing of the self that happens with this. The Sun, your Atma, your soul, yourself, that true self that you connect to when you go into meditation and your mind quiets. connect with the sun energy, your essence. And when it's in Libra, it's like, well, what is my essence? Is it when I'm with this person, or when I'm with that person, it's a little bit different? And when I'm working on this project, I'm like this. When I'm doing this, I'm like that. And we all have multiple facets to us. But when the sun in Libra, it can have you question those things, and in some ways have you find more harmony on the other side of it after this month, this 30 days from October 17th, where you find more what is out of balance and what needs to be adjusted to restore balance. There can be an avoidance of confrontation at the cost of self-expression. The way out is through. It's always like ripping the Band-Aid off. It's always a little bit more scary up front, but in the long run, a lot less painful to just address the issue as soon as you can, as best you can. We all have our challenges. We all have our insecurities, fears, weaknesses. It's human. So be kind to yourself. If you are avoiding a conflict or feeling resistant to addressing an issue that needs to be addressed, that can come up with this transit as well. But if you can just be kind to yourself, be kind to them, and just kind of face it head on, which Sun in Libra is not known for loving to do. It can be surprising how much energy is freed up and how well things can move from there. And there's potential for becoming overly dependent on others' opinions, which ultimately, it's like, who cares? Wednesday, October 18th, Mercury in Libra. Mercury, joining this party in Libra. Actually, I'll move through the calendar here. If you're watching the video, you see the sun is going to move on the bottom right over to Libra. And then now on the 18th, late into the 18th, Mercury joins the party there. Got Ketu, Mercury, Sun, Mars, all in Libra by October 18th. So Mercury being here brings enhanced communication skills and diplomacy. 19 days here, a little bit longer than usual for Mercury. Increased ability to find common ground in discussions. Favorable for fair negotiations and resolving conflicts. There's a risk of indecisiveness and difficulty making choices. Tendency to be overly influenced by others' opinions. And a potential for superficial conversations to avoid depth. So, because there's the sign exchange with Venus and the Sun, if you're watching the video, you can see Venus in Leo, Sun in Libra. There's a sign exchange there. That helps the Sun in Libra, that debilitation part I talked about. It makes it more positive. So less of the difficulties of the negative side of Sun in Libra are present because of that. And then you add Mercury to this, and that helps. That helps the communication and relationships and negotiating things. But there's also that Leo energy, which can bring some of the superficiality. And I just don't do it. If I'm in a conversation that's too superficial, I will try to move it in some interesting direction. Be curious about the person you're talking to. Ask them something that you're like, you don't know the answer to, and just kind of move the conversation in some interesting direction. And then Mercury's in Swati for 8 days starting on October 22nd. So Mercury starts out in Chitra, where it was also in Virgo. This great creative energy I talked about last week. And then goes into Swati, which improves our adaptability in communication. It's good for initiating and completing projects requiring diplomacy and collaboration. Good negotiation skills, finding solutions. So if there's something that's unresolved in relationships, this helps a lot. After October 22nd, to have peace negotiations, there's potential to conflict due to a desire to maintain balance. And there could be some overanalyzing, becoming overly critical energy here as well. An overly perfectionistic energy is always a risk with Chitra and coming out of all this Virgo energy. And then Virgo's left empty after all this. So, not ever empty, there's always the other rulerships and other aspects and all this. But we have all this stuff going on here, which I think, as far as going to zoom out a little bit here to the world issues, I think there may be some peace negotiations and resolution around that time. But real briefly, as we look back through history of what happened, October 7th, we had Mars and Ketu join up, which as I mentioned before, some astrologers were predicting doom and gloom, and to some degree, they were right. And I try to steer away from that and try to focus on the personal stuff. So on a personal level, I don't think it's so much doom and gloom, but there is this world conflict, of course, happening. And we look at this connection here, this aspecting of Rahu, Jupiter, Ketu, and Mars was also present on 9/11. We see Rahu, Jupiter, Ketu, and Mars aspecting each other. And then also present during the London bombing in 2005, where we see Rahu, Mars, Jupiter, and Ketu all aspecting each other. So there is that element of the nodes of the moon coming together with Mars, the warrior, and Jupiter, which a lot of people don't know this, but Jupiter is associated with the general, like the person calling the shots for the war. So you bring all that together, you got the general, the warrior, and the malefic influence of Rahu and Ketu, which, if we go into the mythology, which I just did this week with my astrology mentorship class, we talked about the mythology of the grahas, the planets. Rahu and Ketu were once one body, one demon, Asura, in the Vedic tradition, wanting to become immortal. The demon snuck into this meeting of the gods who were bestowed with this elixir of immortality. Rahu snuck in, got a drop of the Amrita, the elixir of immortality, but Shiva caught Rahu right after he got that drop, severed his head off, and then Rahu is the head, Ketu is the body of this being, which had already got that drop of immortality. So Rahu and Ketu becomes immortal, becomes one of the grahas alongside all the others, Saturn, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, all these. So we get Rahu Ketu, which was essentially this deceptive energy trying to reach immortality, trying to sneak in to get to this elixir of immortality. And it was ultimately caught, but it lives on in this sense that we all have this energy within us somewhere that can become consumptive, addictive, just wanting more, never knowing when there's enough with Rahu. And then Ketu, this detached, transcendent kind of energy, which I'll just leave it at that for now. But when we put all that together, Ketu, Mars, Rahu, Jupiter, we see, at least through these relatively recent, very significant attacks in history, that there is that connection there in different signs in all cases. So it's not about what sign it's in, but those four grahas coming together in this aspect has this energy. So that may be part of what is happening here, but the fortunate side of this, in the same way with 9/11 and the London bombings, is those were one-time attacks, and Mars does not stay in a sign very long, so about 2 months, that the Mars will be here in this energy. But Rahu and Ketu are going to move before that. So Ketu, if you're using the true node, which I do use, that's the actual placement of Rahu and Ketu in the calculations, then it moves at the end of November. If you're using the mean node, it moves at the end of October, so just a couple weeks. So we will see. The mean node energy effects do tend to start to take hold about a month before the true node. We do start to see some of those effects. So potentially these conflicts in the Middle East could resolve within 2 weeks. And when you see all this stuff move into Libra, especially when Mercury gets there too, on the 18th, then we have this big move into like diplomacy, resolution, peace talks, and then the latest, I think, with this transit, the end of November, we see the nodes change. It's by like November 28th. That may be the end of the attacks and the conflict. Ideally, it is already the end. You know, that's what I would love to say. But these energies are present together for at most until November 29th or so. So a month and a half. Rahu, Ketu, Mars, Jupiter, all in this relationship to each other. So that's what I see in the astrology. Hopefully that's helpful in seeing the big picture of the world events. But again, on the personal level, quick recap of what's going on this week. Friday the 13th, whatever, just another day. The eclipse, not just another day. Lay low, take it easy if you can. No big decisions, no impulsivity. And it's also the new moon, of course, so also a day, good time for some sort of self-care, recovery, restorative practices. Tuesday, October 17th, Venus and Purva Falguni in Leo. Good time for romance, harmony in relationships, bringing beauty into your life. Beware of overindulgence. Tuesday, October 17th, also Sun moves into Libra, bringing more balance to relationships. Some potential for avoiding confrontation, difficulty in knowing what to say, what you feel. But if you just lean into it, not so bad. Mercury in Libra, October 18th. Now we've got the big stellium in Libra, bringing possible improved communication and negotiation skills. And then Mercury in Swati, October 22nd. Well, that's next Sunday. Actually, I went too far ahead. We'll talk about that next week. So I went all the way past next week. So we'll get to Mercury and Swati more next week. But October 22nd, that can also improve negotiation skills and help you complete some projects, and overall favorable for finding harmony and balance in relationships. So hope you found this podcast favorable and helpful for you. If you did, please take just a moment to leave an honest review in Apple Podcasts. And if you do, you can go to quietmindastrology.com/monthly review, and I will send you my free monthly review process, which is great to do at the beginning of the month or at the new moon on Saturday. Great time to just reflect, review what's going on, your health, wealth, relationships, purpose, what you want to create moving forward. I guide you through the process. Super simple, but super effective. I find it to be one of the most important things that I do for myself is those review processes. You learn so much, you get so much clarity, and it just kind of brings all your energy back into the present moment to harness it and move it forward, which is a big part of what I'm doing here. It's helping you collect your energy, focus on what you can control, connect to what is in alignment for you. Only you know what that is. And one of the best ways to do that is knowing your birth chart. So if you've never had a reading before, I do have limited space for the rest of the year and through December. I could do one more in October, and I will have a special offer around Black Friday, so stay tuned for that, and just a couple in November and December. So I'm mostly focusing on the Vedic Astrology mentorship right now. We have an amazing class there, super fun. We had our mystical mingle last night, connecting and hanging out, getting to know each other, and who our first crushes were, and when we got our first cell phones. So very important stuff, connecting with the group. So that's been really fun. But that next mentorship class will be opening next year. But right now, if you want to go a little deeper beyond this podcast, sign up for the free weekly horoscopes, get your free birth chart, do the monthly review for the new moon, and subscribe, leave a review. These things all help reach more people, share the wealth of knowledge of astrology, because this stuff was so hard and complicated to learn when I was starting out that I wish this podcast existed, so I made it, and hope it helps you know how to align with your truth and the energies of the universe this week and make the most of it. Hope you have a great week. Look forward to sharing more with you next time on the Quiet Mind Astrology Podcast.